Hi folks, Wooden Boat Dan here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. The podcast you're about to listen to was recorded several years ago, so some of the phone numbers, email addresses, website links, and time-sensitive information are no longer valid. Please keep that in mind as you listen. If you'd like to contact me, my email address is woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Hooked on Wooden Boats weekly podcast episode number 115. I'm your host, Dan Matson, aka Wooden Boat Dan. If you can't do it, don't even attempt it at home especially. And this is the world's first podcast fully dedicated to celebrating the art, craft, history, tradition, and romance of wooden vessels around the globe. Welcome to the podcast today, folks. Great to have you tuning in and listening to this. I hope you're having a fine day. I'm recording this on December 12th for distribution on December 14th, 2013. For those of you that are listening in the month of December, Merry Christmas. Hope you have a great Christmas this year. Today's featured segment is an interview with myself. Yes, I'm going to interview myself again. And today I'm going to be talking about the SCAMP that I recently built and sold. I'm not going to be talking so much about the sale of the boat, but the building process, some things I learned, how much time it took me, how much it cost, things I would do differently, how I like the SCAMP and the kit, and some things like that. So stick around for that interview. I mentioned last week that the comments on my website are working again. So I'd love it if you go on there and leave some comments under the show notes for one of the episodes. That would be really cool, and I would promise to respond to your comments. And also, I found out that the reason the website is loading slow, which to me it's loading slow, is because of all these photographs I have on the website that I have not resized or downsized that really slow things down. So I'm going to be working on a period of time over here on resizing the pictures, and there's 635 pictures, I believe, on the website. So it's going to take me a little time, so please be patient. I apologize that the site is loading slowly right now. Has been for a while, actually, and I really wasn't sure why, but now I've found the culprit, and the culprit is me. So I am going to get that fixed. You know, when you love wooden boats and want to just mess with boats, you don't dedicate quite as much time to the technical part of what you do. But that's one of those areas that I need to pay a little more attention to. So I'm going to get that working, and I'm hoping over a period of time I'll get those resized and the site will load a little quicker for you. I know it's frustrating sometimes to go to a site and it sits there and kind of gink, gink, gink. You know, you're like, okay, it's been 3 seconds. I've only got 4.5 seconds, and then I got to do something else. We get in a hurry nowadays. But anyway, it's on its way to being fixed. We have new subscribers to the electronic newsletter from Hooked on Wooden Boats, Stephen Yates and Paul Gill. Welcome to the newsletter, guys. Good to have you on board. For those of you listening, I send out a monthly newsletter. Actually, I do. Sometimes it's later in the month than others. But I send it out every month. It's free. It helps me connect with people that enjoy the podcast. I give you information and resources about what's happening at Hooked on Wooden Boats, include some videos and some fun links and things. So I would encourage you to subscribe if you haven't already by going to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe. And give me your first and last name and email address, and you're in like Flint. I'm still contemplating my next boat build. As you know, I sold my SCAMP a couple of weeks ago, and I've been working on some little wooden benches out of rustic wood type of stuff for a consignment shop, and I delivered a second bench to the shop last week, and it's actually a pretty cool bench. The top opens, and it's got some storage in it. And I made it out of a 2.25-inch slab of cedar that I got out of a barn that I resawed into 7/8-inch pieces and some old fencing. So it's made out of cedar, and it's got some varnish and stuff on it. It came out pretty cool. In fact, maybe I'll include a picture on my website if I remember to do that. So I've been working on that. my shop's been really cold because I don't have heat in there, and it's been in the teens and 20s and low 30s here for about a week or so. So my shop's been 42 degrees or so, and it's like, wow, that's really cold to work. I don't have heat out there. I'm tempted to put a little electric heater out there, but it probably cost me a fortune. I don't know. But anyway, contemplating my next build. I've got a gentleman that is asking if I would build him an 8 or 10 foot flat bottom pram for fly fishing, one that he could stand in and that would weigh under 100 pounds. He could throw it in the back of his truck. So that's kind of an intriguing idea to me. So I've been looking at plans online and stuff, thought about designing my own actually, because I think it would be just a 5-panel boat, be pretty simple design. If you know of a design for an 8 or 10 foot pram that you really like that's real simple, not a V-bottom but a one-piece flat bottom and pram bowed and so on, shoot me an email if you would. I'd like to see what you are thinking is a good boat. Dan at hookedonwoodenboats.com is my email address, and I would love to hear from you on that. So what I'm thinking, if it's a 5-panel boat, it might be something that you could actually assemble in, I don't know, I'm guessing maybe completely assembled in somewhere around 30 hours, possibly, once you kind of got a system down. So maybe it'd be a boat I could build several of them and sell them or something like that. So anyway, I would appreciate your thoughts on that. If you have some, please shoot me an email. I'm pretty excited because I've got some upcoming interviews with some really interesting people. I'm going to be interviewing Gail, who is the daughter of Glenn L. Witt of Glenn L. Boat Designs. It's been around for years selling kits and plans for boats, I think for maybe 50 years, something like that. Gail is Glenn's daughter, and she runs the family business, and I'm going to be talking to her on an interview in the next few weeks here, and also Ian Uhtred, who is a small boat designer and builder, lives in Australia currently, and does a lot of glued plywood lapstrake boats. And if you've been in the small boat world very much, you've probably heard that name. So I'm pretty excited to be connecting with him soon here also to do a phone interview. So stick around for those upcoming interviews. I think they're going to be a lot of fun. And by the way, if you have ideas for other folks you'd like to see me interview, just shoot me an email. I do get quite a few suggestions, but I'm always open to new ones. I can't get to them all, but if you've got great ideas, I'd love to hear them. Again, it's Dan at hookedonwoodenboats.com. Okay, we're going to move into the interview now. Take it away, Dan. Okay, it is December 12, 2013. I am in Arlington, Washington with Dan Matson of Hooked on Wooden Boats. Dan, welcome to the podcast. Why, thank you. It's great to be here today. Dan, we wanted to talk about the SCAMP boat that you recently built. When did you recently completed a SCAMP boat? Is that correct? Why, yes, it is. Well, Dan, tell us about that build. Why did you build a SCAMP in the first place? Okay, enough for the fake voices. I'm just going to talk from here out. I just had to do that. I don't know why. I guess it's because my podcast and I can do whatever I want, right? You may not listen, but if you heard this, you are listening, so stick around. Anyway, why did I build the SCAMP? Well, okay, let me back up just a little bit. What is a SCAMP? For those of you that don't know, it's a boat that was a brainchild of Josh Colvin out of Port Townsend. Josh had been sailing small vessels for quite a while and had a bunch of ideas that he would like to see incorporated into a boat. And so he contacted John Welsford of New Zealand, who's a small boat designer, and ran this idea by John of a micro-cruising sailboat that would be, maybe 10 or 12 feet in length, that would have all these special features that Josh wanted. And so John went to the drawing board and came up with some ideas, and they went back and forth, and they ended up with this 11-foot, 11-inch pram-bowed micro-cruising sailboat. And some of the really awesome features about it, it has a water ballast tank that holds 173 pounds of water. It's pram-bowed, and so it's a very large, small boat. Even though the length is 11 feet 11 inches, it has a 5 foot 4 inch beam, and it has a lot of freeboard. If I were to guess how much freeboard, I would say maybe 24 inches, something like that. So it has a lot of freeboard. It's a lap strake boat. It has, gosh, I should know this. I think it has 3 laps on each side, which are pretty big strakes. It has a lot of flotation throughout the boat, compartments that you put hatches on and make them watertight, so the boat's very safe if it were to capsize. It's a balanced lug rig with an unstayed mast, so it's very safe that way. It's got a lot of storage in the boat because of all the flotation compartments. The centerboard for the boat is off-center. It's actually placed on the edge of the seats on the starboard side of the boat. And so because of that, and because of the width of the boat, the cockpit in this boat is huge. I would say the cockpit is as large as some 20 to 24 foot sailboats. So depending upon what kind of sailing you're doing and how long you're going to be out, you could put anywhere from 2 people very easily and possibly up to 4 people in the cockpit and go sailing. So that's pretty cool. And there is provisions for tenting over the boom so that 1 and possibly 2 people could sleep in the cockpit of the boat. It's got a little veranda, which is a little slightly covered area forward in the boat. It's just an amazing little boat. It's very, very seaworthy. It's undergone some capsize testing by Howard Rice and performed very well. So it's just an amazing little boat. So I first heard about this boat, I think about 2 years ago, and I started getting fascinated about it. And then I met John Welsford, and I went to one of the SCAMP camps in Port Townsend and got to see him building the boats. And then this past year I got to go out and sail one. And then I found out they were selling kits for the boats, and there was only a handful of them being made, although a lot of plans for the boats are being sold. And I had some time this summer, and I'd finished building my canoe, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to build a SCAMP to sell. And part of the reason I built it to sell was financially I could use the money. And secondly, I kind of wanted to get one under my belt and thought, if this one goes well, I'll build another one, and maybe I can do a little side business or a part-time business building boats for people. So it was kind of an experiment that way. And originally I thought I could build the boat for maybe somewhere around $3,000 to $3,500 and maybe 150 to 200 hours and sell it for around $6,000 and make some money. At the end of everything, I picked up the kit June 1st, I believe it was. Worked on it quite a bit in the summer and actually finished it in October. And I'll go over some of the details on these numbers, but I ended up spending 208 hours on the boat, approximately, give or take a little bit, and about $4,100, and ended up selling it for $7,200. So I made about a $3,000 profit for 200 and some hours of labor. So, kind of a $14 to $15 an hour project, if you look at it that way. But, I make a lot more than that on my day job, fortunately, or I wouldn't be able to, I'd be living in a teepee somewhere. But anyway, it was a great experience, and I wanted to just talk about the SCAMP here and some of the things that I learned and so on. So let's start with some of the things I learned maybe that I would do differently next time if I build another SCAMP, which I'm hoping to at some point. I guess first of all, I'll say that the kit that I purchased for the SCAMP cost $2,600. That was with the rudder and centerboard kit also. The precision with which everything was cut was unbelievable, including the rolling bevels on the lap strake panels for the side of the boat. As I was assembling the boat, I knew if something wasn't fitting correctly that I was doing something incorrectly because the parts fit so well. So the kit was amazing, $2,600 for the kit. I don't know how much it would cost just to buy the plywood to cut the kit yourself, but I'm guessing, and this is a rough guess, that if you bought the plywood yourself, you'd save $800 to $1,000. But I'm also guessing that if you bought the plywood yourself and cut all the parts out yourself, so you'd have to lay them all out and do a little bit of lofting, make sure everything was fair, that you could probably spend, I'm guessing, easily a couple of weeks cutting the parts out. That's how complex. And I think there's a total of about 74 parts, give or take a couple, that come with the kit. So I'm glad I purchased the kit. It was well worth saving all that time and ending up with parts that fit so precisely. When I built the boat this time, I did quite a bit of epoxy coating of parts before I assembled the boat. In fact, on all parts that I could, I applied 3 coats of epoxy. I would apply the first coat, let it dry overnight, sand it, and then apply 2 more coats, and then light sanding with 80 grit sandpaper. And I did that to as many parts as I could, which was most of the parts of the boat. I think next time what I would do differently is what Russell Brown recommends, is where you actually glass fiberglass parts also off the boat. So that would entail like glassing the 2 garboard strakes on the boat, glassing the bottom of the boat, glassing the transom, and glassing the bow transom also before being assembled on the boat. I think I would do it that way. I think that would save time, and doing that work on a flat surface, you're not going to get some of the runs and things that you get very easily otherwise. And then when those parts were assembled together, I would tape the edges between those parts to give the bond that you would get if you did it with one piece of fiberglass cloth. So I think that's one thing I would do differently. I think the other thing I would do if I were going to build another one to sell is I would build the kit without the rudder and centerboard and offer the kit assembled for $6,500, whereas this time around I sold the kit with the rudder and centerboard for $7,200. Reason being is a lot of time and labor and money goes into the centerboard and rudder of the boat. I spent at least 22 hours on building the centerboard, which included you start with 2 halves, and you have to hollow out a portion of the centerboard, and you have to install your lead, and you have to epoxy the halves together. Then you put 2 coats of fiberglass cloth on each side, embed that in epoxy, and then you put epoxy graphite on top of that, and then you install a copper sleeve for the centerboard pin also. So there's a lot of time involved, and it's fairly expensive, and I'm thinking somebody buying the boat assembled might be willing to build that part themselves, and so that way I could sell the assembled boat for less money and build it quicker. I think I could build just the boat itself without the rudder and centerboard, fully epoxy coated and clothed, fiberglass cloth, in around 150 or 160 hours this time. Because if I deduct my time for the rudder and centerboard, that's about 30. So that takes me from about 210 down to 180. And I think I could build it. I could save another 20 hours off that. So probably 150 or 160 hours, something like that. I would be sure to cut the hatches in bulkhead 4 before I installed it on the boat. This time I cut it afterwards. Of course, I didn't know what hatches I was going to put in, and I didn't put hatches in. But I just cut holes so you had access to that, so whoever bought it could put their own hatches. I would make sure and assemble the mast trunk onto the bulkhead 4 while it was on the bench. This time I assembled the mast trunk 3 sides and then put it on the bulkhead 4 after the bulkhead had been installed on the boat. I think it would have been easier to do it all off of the bench. And I would not have installed the transom doubler until the boat was all complete, because with the transom doubler in the boat, the cockpit sole doesn't want to go down and fit underneath the doubler on the transom. And so you're constantly fighting that. Finally, I ended up cutting off the sole itself by about a half an inch, which they'll be able to fill it with an epoxy fillet. But that was something else I would do differently. And I did steam the gunnels and the carlins with, and I used Doug fir, which doesn't steam really great. But in fact, I broke my first gunnel that I tried to steam on the boat. It cracked. So what I ended up doing was steaming the gunnel, clamping it to the boat, leaving it clamped overnight. And then I would go back and put screws in about every 6 inches and remove clamps 1 or 2 at a time and reposition the gunnel as I went from the aft to the fore of the boat. Then once I had done that, what I would do, let that sit for a couple days. Then I unscrewed half the gunnel and put epoxy on, and then put the screws back in. And then did the other half of the gunnel, took the screws out, put the epoxy on, and put the screws back in. And that worked really good. So if I build another one, I'll be able to do the carlins and the gunnels a lot more efficiently that way. Because I was trying to clamp an epoxy, and it just wasn't working too good. So I got a pretty good system down there that I think would work. So here's a breakdown on the cost of building the boat. The plywood kit and the lumber I had to buy for the cleats and the carlins and the gunnels was $2,722. Pin nails, screws, and a brass eye for the bow, $97. Paint and primer for the forward stowage area, $118 for marine paint and primer. For the epoxy and the fillers and the pumps and the fiberglass cloth and the epoxy rollers and brushes, all that stuff was almost $1,000, $997. So that really adds to the cost there. And then sandpaper and sandpaper discs, $188. And this time I went with the rolled sandpaper that you stick to a special sanding block, and that works awesome. Once you use that, you'll never go back to a sheet of sandpaper that you have to cut in thirds and put onto a special block or however you do it. It's just an amazing way to do it. It costs a little bit more, but it's so much faster and efficient. And then I spent $15 for lead for the centerboard trunk, which, if you recall, what I did to go buy lead, 18 pounds of lead for the centerboard and 2 pounds for the rudder, would have cost me probably $70 or $80, right in that range. And I found somebody on Craigslist that had some lead weights, ankle weights, exercise weights that were kind of worn out, the leather, and those were filled with lead. So I just cut the leather apart and ended up with over 20 pounds of lead shot inside of these ankle weights. So that worked out really good. So total cost, $4,137, not including sales tax for all that stuff. Now, could you build it for less? Yeah, you could. You could buy your own plywood and cut the parts out yourself. Let's say you could save $800 there. You could use a less expensive epoxy. I used West Systems, which I really like. They've been around for years and have great technical support. But if you used a cheaper brand, you might be able to save, because I used 5 gallons of that, and you could probably save $200 or $300 by doing that. So now you're saving $300 there plus $800 on the kit, so that's $1,100. So you might be able to build this boat for $3,000. And again, that would not include spars, sails, hardware, paint, and varnish, and all that stuff. Because I did sell the assembled kit. It wasn't a completely finished boat. So that's what the cost is. Now, as far as the actual time to build the boat, and I've got this detailed on my website. If you go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/scamp, there's all the information there. To build the jig, assemble it, level it, and secure it to the floor, I spent 6 hours joining the whole bottom panels and epoxy coating those, installing on the jig a couple hours, 28 hours to build the centerboard and the rudder, 62 hours to assemble the bulkheads, the seat longitudinals, centerboard trunk, the stem, the cabin and deck supports, and the mast trunk, and to epoxy coat and fillet all those parts. That was 62 hours. Installing and pre-coating the transom, 3 hours. Installing the seat cleats and sole cleats, sanding and epoxy, 14 hours. That's a tedious job. There's somewhere around 70 or 80 cleats that you have to install out of the boat out of material that's approximately 7/8 by 3/4 inches. So that takes a lot of time. The planking, to plank the boat, install the planking, fillet the joints, and tape and sand, 31 hours on that. Cockpit sole, 2 hours. Seat tops and combings, fit, epoxy, coat, and install, 5 hours. Steam and install the gunnels and deck carlins, 16 hours. As I mentioned, I could cut that back quite a bit because that included time to blow one out, so that was pretty high. Installing the deck, which is 3 parts. First to have to join it and then install it. And that can be a little tricky, about 7 hours there, including epoxy coating. Fiberglassing the bottom, the garboards, the transoms, and 3 coats of epoxy and sanding, 15 hours. Installing the cabin sides and cabin top, epoxy coating, and installing those, 17 hours, and miscellaneous 2 hours. So that's about 208 hours total. And as I mentioned before, 28 hours of that was building the rudder and centerboard. And plus I think if I built the boat again, I could save another 20 hours probably, just because I've done it once. It would be a lot more efficient this time around. So what else did I learn? Well, I learned once again that when you're using epoxy, you want to use it very carefully, very frugally. You want to have enough epoxy, but not too much, because if you get too much, you're going to have a mess to clean up. You want to be sure and clean up any runs or sags before they dry, because once they dry, that stuff is so hard. It's just a pain. And I got to be a lot better at making fillets and making them fairly precise. And the method I came up with, you can actually see a video of me doing some fillets at hookedonwoodenboats.com/fillet. Actually, now that I've said that, I need to verify that link. Give me just a second here. Okay, it's a good thing I checked. The link is actually hookedonwoodenboats.com/fillet video, FILLETVIDEO. So I would encourage you to check that out. I got to be good at mixing, using this special mixture of material thickeners, 2 parts of West Systems 407 low density filler, 2 parts of the 406 colloidal silica, and 1 part 404 high density. This is a mix that's recommended by Russell Brown in his ebook, and it makes a nice hard fillet, but it also makes it fairly smooth and not as bad to sand as just using straight epoxy with like a straight high density or wood flour. So get good at your fillets. That's going to save you time, especially cleaning up after you do the fillets. It's really tedious. I did them in Ziploc bags most of the time. I made my own epoxy tools out of 4 and 6 millimeter plywood. And what I found was the more preparation I did before I actually started mixing the fillet material, the more successful I was. So I really get everything organized, have everything set up, ready to go, have a little palette with all my tools on it, have my paper towels handy, have my gloves on, have my mixing stuff all ready, my bag ready, my fillers pre-mixed. So everything was ready to go, organized and laid out, kind of like a doctor going into surgery. He's got his scalpel and all his tools all clean and ready to go. Nurses are ready to assist. Fortunately, I didn't have any nurse to assist me doing the fillets, but anyway, do a lot of prep and those will go good. And let's see, the other thing is using the seat tops that come with the boat to check the bulkhead positioning often. The bulkheads tend to, even though they're mounted to the bottom of the boat, until you get the outside planks mounted onto the bulkheads, those bulkheads are going to move on you. So you got to get those seats. The seats have notches for the bulkheads, so if you put them on there and you keep those in position, that's going to help a lot. The other thing I did is I tried to avoid using screws as much as possible. When I was epoxying parts together and doing filleting and stuff, I held things in place either with clamps or using stainless steel pin nails, and that worked real well. If you do screws, then you've got to recess the screws, and you kind of got to come back and fill over the heads and sand. That's a lot of extra work, plus it adds a little bit of weight to the boat. So I didn't use very many screws in this whole boat, and that worked out pretty good. So would I build a SCAMP again? You bet. Would I build it from the kit again? Yeah, absolutely. I would do it from the kit. Actually, I hope to have a SCAMP for myself someday. I think it's an ideal small boat for 1 or 2 or 3 or up to 4 people to go and mess around on. It only weighs 400 pounds when it's all complete, so it's very light to tow around, easy to get in and out of the water. There's just a lot of advantages to this boat. And plus it is officially a sailing class recognized with the United States Sailing Association. I think that's what it's called, U.S. Sailing Association. Anyway, it is recognized as a one-class boat, and people are building these boats all over the world. I don't know how many have been completed at this point. I'm guessing somewhere between 20 and 40 boats are completed and being used. And there's, last time I checked with Josh, it's 200 and maybe 250 sets of plans have been sold, maybe up to 300, somewhere in that range probably. And these boats are being built all over the world, and there's a reason. They're pretty cool boats. A lot of thought going into them. Very seaworthy, very practical, not expensive to build. My boat, to take it to the level I did, cost $4,200. I'm guessing in hard cost to finish the boat with the sails and the mast and paint and varnish and hardware and a trailer and a little outboard. You're looking in the $10,000 to $15,000 range probably. But you have an amazing boat when you get done. So yeah, I would definitely build it again. So if you'd like some more of the gory details and pictures on the SCAMP that I built, you can go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/SCAMP. In there I've got a section on the cost and time to build it, and then I've got a section with some tips and tricks, and then I've got some updates in there that I wrote during the build process. And then if you go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/SCAMP for sale, there's a video there and some more information about the SCAMP. And if you're interested in me building you a SCAMP, shoot me an email, dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. Let's talk. I'd be interested in doing that for you. Well, Dan, thanks for doing that interview today. It's great to have you on the Hooked on Wooden Boats podcast, and we'll have you back again. So thanks for tuning in today, folks. Good to have you on board. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and YouTube if you look for Wooden Boat Dan. I do have an ebook that I sell on my website that I wrote. It's about getting in the wooden boat game and building your first boat. If you go to hookedonwoodenboats.com, you'll see it on the on the home page there to the right-hand side. You can order it. It costs $4.99 as a download. And I also sell Russell Brown's book on the ins and outs of epoxy, using epoxy efficiently and cleanly. And Russell's an expert at that. You can buy that book for $5.99. So lots of good things. I'd encourage you to check out my website. Leave me a review in iTunes if you enjoy the podcast. I've got 50 reviews now, and they're all very positive. I think I've only got one that's less than a 5-star. And so I would encourage you to do that. You can also subscribe to the podcast there. And again, Merry Christmas. Have a very joyful Christmas season here in December 2013 or whenever you're listening to this. God bless. Have a great week. Keep the bright side up and the barnacled side down. Wooden Boat Dan, over and out. Till we meet again next week.